Welcome back to our Rich Dad, Poor Dad readings. And I know you're itching to get on with it because we're going to talk about history of taxes and the powers of corporations. Just when you thought it couldn't get more exciting, we're going to talk about taxes. But this is actually a really good point when it comes to the fact that you work a quarter of your year at least, or 30% of the year, paying the government. So until that point, all that money is theirs. And then after that, you get to keep all of it essentially, right? So from the rest of the year, from May onward, it's your money. Okay. Chapter 4. Lesson 4. Well, it also says chapter 4. It's not my fault though. Okay. I remember in school being told the story of Robin Hood and his merry men. My teacher thought it was a wonderful story of a romantic hero who robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. My rich dad did not see Robin Hood as a hero. He called Robin Hood a crook. Robin Hood may be long gone, but his followers live on. I often still hear people say, "Why don't the rich pay for it?" Or, "The rich should pay more in taxes and give it to the poor." In this Robin Hood fantasy, or taking from the rich to give to the poor, that has caused the most pain for the poor and the middle class. The reason the middle class is so heavily taxed is because of the Robin Hood ideal. The reality is that the rich are not taxed. It's the middle class, especially the educated upper income middle class, who pays for the poor. Again, to understand fully how things happen, we need to look at the history of taxes. Although my highly educated dad was an expert on the history of education, my rich dad fashioned himself an expert on the history of taxes. Rich Dad explained to Mike and me that originally in England and in America there were no taxes. Occasionally there were temporary taxes levied in order to pay for wars. The king or the president would put the word out and ask everyone to chip in. Taxes were levied in Britain to fight against Napoleon from 1799 to 1816, and in America to pay for the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. In 1874, England made income tax a permanent levy on its citizens. In 1913, an income tax became permanent in the United States with the adoption of the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. At one time, Americans were anti-tax. It had been the tax on tea that had led to the famous Tea Party in Boston Harbor, an incident that helped ignite the Revolutionary War. It took approximately 50 years in both England and the United States to sell the idea of regular income tax. What these historical dates fail to reveal is that both of these taxes were initially levied against only the rich. It was this point the rich dad wanted Mike and me to understand. He explained that the idea of taxes was made popular and accepted by the majority by telling the poor and the middle class that taxes were only created to punish the rich. This was how the masses voted for the law. It became constitutionally legal. Although it was intended to punish the rich, in reality it wound up punishing the very people who voted for it, the poor and middle class. Once government got a taste of money, its appetite grew, said Rich Dad. Your dad and I are exactly opposite. He's a government bureaucrat and I'm a capitalist. We get paid. Our success is measured on opposite behaviors. He gets paid to spend money and hire people. The more he spends and the more people he hires, the largest organization becomes. In the government, a large organization is a respected organization. On the other hand, with my organization, the fewer people I hire and the less money I spend, the more I am respected by my investors. That's why I don't like government people. They have different objectives than most business people. As the government grows, the more and more tax dollars are needed to support it. My educated dad sincerely believed the government should help people. He loved John F. Kennedy and especially the idea of peace, the Peace Corps. He loved the idea so much that both he and my mom worked for the Peace Corps, training volunteers to go to Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. He always strived for additional grants and budget increases so he could hire more people, both in his job and with the education department in the Peace Corps. From the time I was about 10 years old, I would hear from my rich dad that government workers were a lazy pack of thieves, and from my poor dad, I would hear how the rich were greedy crooks who should be made to pay more taxes. Both sides had valid points. It was difficult to go to work for one of the biggest capitalists in town and come home to a father who was a prominent government leader. It was not easy to know which dad to believe. Yet when you study the history of taxes, an interesting perspective emerges. As I said, the passages of taxes was only possible because of the masses believed in the Robin Hood theory of economics. Take from the rich and give to everyone else. The problem was that the government's appetite grew for money, so that taxes soon needed to be levied on the middle class, and from there it kept trickling down. I'm going to read this little blurb real quick here. The rich will never be taxed. More and more often we see governments use tax laws to provide incentives to business owners and investors to create jobs and housing. These incentives reduce the taxes of the rich, so the only place for the government to drive tax revenue is from the middle class. Okay. However, the rich saw an opportunity because they don't play by the same set of rules. The rich knew about corporations, which became popular in the days of sailing ships. The rich created the corporations as a vehicle to limit their risk to their assets of each voyage. The rich put their money into a corporation to finance the voyage. The corporation would then hire crew to sail to the New World to look for treasure. If the ship was lost, the crew lost their lives, but the loss to the rich would be limited only to the money they invested for that particular voyage. The diagram that follows shows how the corporate structure sits outside your personal income statement and balance sheet. So let's see what we have. Personal balance sheet, corporate income statement, personal income statement. So if you have assets in your personal balance sheet, they produce an income for your corporation. And then that corporation pays the expenses. And then that goes into your income. And then your expenses are covered by the corporation. I think that's how it works. Let me read a little bit more. I'm not that familiar with corporate tax law, so maybe we'll both get educated here. Let's see. It is the knowledge of legal corporate structure that really gives the rich a vast advantage over poor and middle classes. Having two fathers teaching me, one a socialist, another a capitalist, I quickly began to realize that the philosophy of the capitalists made more financial sense to me. It seemed to me that the socialists ultimately penalized themselves due to their lack of financial education. No matter what the take from the rich crowd came up with, the rich always found a way to outsmart them. That is how taxes were eventually levied on the middle class. The rich outsmarted the intellectuals solely because they understood the power of money, a subject not taught in schools. How did the rich outsmart the intellectuals? Once the, quote, take from the rich tax was passed, cash started flowing into government coffers. Initially, people were happy. Money was handed out to government workers and the rich. It went to government workers in the form of jobs and pensions, and it went to the rich via their factories receiving government contracts. The government received a large pool of money, but the problem was the fiscal management of that money. The government ideal is to avoid having excess money. If you fail to spend your allotted funds, you risk losing it in the next budget. And that reminds me, who was telling me? I think one of my friend's dads or uncle, but they were on an aircraft carrier off California, and essentially the Navy had too much jet fuel. And if they didn't use all the jet fuel by the end of the year, they would get less money for their expenses. All right. So what happened is they essentially dumped all the remaining jet fuel into the ocean. So they just took plane after plane and spread it out over the ocean. So I don't have to comment on that. You can feel as you like learning about that, but the fact that the military was just dumping jet fuel into our waters, international waters, and not like they don't come ashore here, is just ridiculous. That's why I'm more fiscally conservative, because I believe government should get less, because if they get more, they find every reason to spend it, and if they don't even need to spend it, they'll spend it just so they can keep getting more in the future. It's ridiculous. Where was I? Oh. Yeah, okay, if you failed your allotted funds, okay. You would certainly not be recognized for being efficient. Business people, on the other hand, are rewarded for having excess money and are applauded for their efficiency. As this cycle of growing government spending continued, the demand for money increased, and the tax the rich idea was adjusted to include lower income levels, down to the very people who voted it in, the poor and middle class. True capitalists use their financial knowledge to simply find an escape. They headed back to the protection of a corporation. But what many people who have never formed a corporation don't know is that a corporation is really not a thing. A corporation is merely a file folder with some legal documents in it, sitting in some attorney's office and registered with a state government agency. It's not a big building or a factory or group of people. A corporation is merely a legal document that creates a legal body without a soul. Using it, the wealth of the rich was once again protected. It was popular because the income rate of a corporation is less than the individual income tax rates. In addition, certain expenses could be paid by a corporation with pre-tax dollars. This war between the haves and the have-nots was waged for hundreds of years. The battle is waged whenever and wherever laws are made, and will go on forever. The problem is that the people who lose are the uninformed, the ones who get up every day and diligently go to work and pay taxes. If they only understood the way the rich play the game, they could play it too. Then they would be on their way to their own financial independence. This is why I cringe every time I hear a parent advise their children to go to school so they can find a safe, secure job. An employee with a safe, secure job without financial aptitude has no escape. The average American today work 4 to 5 months for the government just to cover their taxes. In my opinion, that is simply too long. The harder you work, the more you pay the government. That is why I believe that the idea of take from the rich backfired on the very people who voted it in. Every time people try to punish the rich don't simply comply, they react. They have the money, power, and intent to change things. They don't just sit there and voluntarily pay more taxes. Instead, they search for ways to minimize their tax burden. They hire smart attorneys, accountants, and persuade politicians to change laws or create global loopholes. They use their resources to effect change. The tax code of the United States also allows other ways to reduce taxes. Most of these vehicles are available to anyone, but it is the rich who find them because they are minding their own business. For example, 1031 is jargon for Section 1031 of the IRS code, which allows a seller to delay paying taxes on a piece of real estate that is sold for capital gain through an exchange for a more expensive piece of real estate. Real estate is one investment vehicle that has a great tax advantage. As long as you keep trading up in value, you will not be taxed on the gains until you liquidate. People who don't take advantage of legal tax savings are missing on great opportunity to build their asset columns. The poor and middle class don't have the same resources. They sit there and let the government's needles enter their arm and allow the blood donation to begin. Today, I'm constantly shocked at the number of people who pay more taxes or take fewer deductions simply because they are afraid of the government. I have friends who have had their businesses shut down and destroyed only to find out it was a mistake on the part of the government. I realize that, but the price of working from January to May is a high price to pay for that intimidation. My poor dad never fought back. My rich dad didn't either. He just played the game smarter, and he did it through corporations, the biggest secret of the rich. Okay, I got a little blurb here. 20 years ago, the tax man. The tax man will take as much as you let him. The tax system is ultimately fair in that it works the same for everyone who has the same situation. If you're willing to invest, the tax laws will work in your favor. If you're willing to spend money and buy liabilities, the tax law won't give you any breaks. It is likely you will pay the most tax possible. You may remember the first lesson I learned from my rich dad. I was a little boy of 9 who had to sit and wait for him to choose to talk to me. He sat in his office waiting for him to get to me. He was ignoring me on purpose. He wanted me to recognize his power and to desire to have that power for myself one day. During all the years I studied and learned from him, he always reminded me that knowledge is power, and with money comes great power that requires the right knowledge to keep it and make it multiply. Without that knowledge, the world pushes you around. Rich Dad constantly reminded Mike and me that the biggest bully was not the boss or the supervisor, but the taxman. The taxman will always take more if you let him. The first lesson of having money work for you, as opposed to you working for money, is all about power. If you work for money, you give the power to your employer. If the money works for you, you keep the power and control it. Once we had this knowledge of power of money working for us, he wanted us to be financially smart and not let anyone or anything push us around. If you are ignorant, it's easy to be bullied. If you know what you're talking about, you have a fighting chance. That is why he paid so much for smart tax accountants and attorneys. It was less expensive to pay them than pay the government. His best lesson to me was, quote, "Be smart, and you won't be pushed around as much." He knew the law because he was a law-abiding citizen and because it was expensive not to know the law. If you know you're right, you're not afraid of fighting back, end quote. Even if you're taking on Robin Hood and his band of merry men. My highly educated dad always encouraged me to land a good job with a strong corporation. He spoke the virtues of working your way up the corporate ladder. He didn't understand that by relying solely on a paycheck from a corporate employer, I would be a docile cow ready for milking. When I told my rich dad of my father's advice, he only chuckled. "Why not own the ladder?" was all he said. As a young boy, I did not understand what Rich Dad meant by owning my own corporation. It was an idea that seemed impossible and intimidating. Although I was excited by the idea, my inexperience wouldn't let me envision the ability or the possibility that grown-ups would someday work for a company I would own. The point is that, if not for my rich dad, I would have probably followed my educated dad's advice. It was merely the occasional reminder of my rich dad that kept my idea of owning my own corporation alive and kept me on a different path. By the time I was 15 or 16, I knew I wasn't going to continue down the path my educated dad recommended. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I was determined not to head in the direction most of my classmates were headed. That decision changed my life. Another little blurb here. Today, as technology continues to change the way we work and do business, I talk more and with more people who ask themselves, how can I own the ladder? Capitalism is thriving, and the free market system means that entrepreneurs who can afford a better product at a better price have a good chance of success. Okay, that didn't say much. Okay, continuing. It was not until my mid-20s that my rich dad's advice began to make more and more sense to me. I was just out of the Marine Corps and working for Xerox. I was making a lot of money, but every time I looked at my paycheck, I was disappointed. The deductions were so large, and the more I worked, the greater they became. As I became more successful, my boss talked about promotions and raises. It was flattering, but I could hear my rich dad ask in my ear, "Who are you working for? Who are you making rich?" In 1974, while I was still an employee for Xerox, I formed my first corporation and began minding my own business. There were already a few assets in my asset column, but now I was determined to focus on making it bigger. Those paychecks, with all the deductions, made all the years of my rich dad's advice make total sense. I could see the future if I followed my educated dad's advice. Many employers feel that advising their workers to mind their own business is bad for business. But for me, focusing on my own business and developing assets made me a better employee because I now had a purpose. I came in early, worked diligently, amassing as much money as I could possibly make so I could invest in real estate. Hawaii was just set to boom, and there were fortunes to be made. And the more I realized that we were in the beginning stages of a boom, the more Xerox machines I sold. The more I sold, the more money I made, and of course, the more deductions came out of my paycheck. It was inspiring. I wanted out of the employee trap so badly that I worked even harder so I could invest more. By 1978, I was consistently one of the top 5 salespeople at my company. I badly wanted out of the rat race. In less than 3 years, I was making more in my real estate holding corporation than I was making at Xerox. The money I was making in my asset column in my own corporation was money working for me, not pounding on doors selling copiers. My rich dad's advice made much more sense. Soon the cash flow from my properties was so strong that my company bought me my first Porsche. My fellow Xerox salespeople thought I was spending my commissions. I wasn't. I was investing my commissions in assets. My money was working hard to make me more money. Each dollar in my asset column was a great employee, working hard to make more employees and buy the boss a new Porsche with before-tax dollars. I began to work hard for Xerox. The plan was working, and my Porsche was the proof. By using the lessons I learned from my rich dad, I was able to get out of the proverbial rat race at an early age. It was made possible because of the strong financial knowledge I had acquired through rich dad's lessons. Without his financial knowledge, which I call financial intelligence or financial IQ, my road to financial independence would have been much more difficult. I now teach others in the hope that I may share my knowledge with them. I remind people that financial IQ is made up of knowledge from 4 broad areas of expertise. Yeah, well, I was going to take a break, but there's only like 2 pages left, so 20 minutes. I guess we can go through the whole chapter 4. Okay, that was quicker than I thought it would be. Okay, the 4 broad areas of expertise. Number 1, accounting. Accounting is financial literacy, or the ability to read numbers. This is a vital skill if you want to build an empire. The more money you're responsible for, the more accounting is required, or the house comes tumbling down. This is the left brain side, or the details. Financial literacy is the ability to read and understand financial statements, which allow you to identify the strengths and weaknesses of any business. 2, investing. Investing is the science of money making money. This involves strategies and formulas that use the creative right side of the brain. 3, understanding markets. Understanding markets is the science of supply and demand. You need to know the technical aspects of the market, which are emotion-driven, in addition to the fundamental or economic aspects of an investment. Does an investment make sense or does it not make sense based on the current market conditions? 4, the law. A corporation wrapped around the technical skills of accounting, investing, and markets can contribute to explosive growth. A person who understands the tax advantage and protections provided by corporations can get rich so much faster than someone who's an employee or a small business sole proprietor. It's like the difference between someone walking and someone flying. The difference is profound when it comes to long-term wealth. Tax advantages. A corporation can do many things that an employee cannot, like pay expenses before paying taxes. That is the whole area of expertise that is very exciting. Employees earn and get taxed and then try to live off what's left. A corporation earns, spends everything it can, and then is taxed on anything that is left. Yeah. Because they don't want to pay taxes, right? So they would rather spend everything on R&D or on employees or whatever have you. So they don't have to pay taxes. The employees are paying taxes on what their salary is, so the government gets money from the corporation through the employees, but they don't usually get anything from the corporation itself. The corporation earns, spends everything it can, and is taxed on anything that is left. It's one of the biggest legal tax loopholes that the rich use. They're easy to set up and are not expensive if you own investments that are producing good cash flow. For example, by owning your own corporation, your vacations can be board meetings in Hawaii. Car payments, insurance, repairs, and health club memberships are company expenses. Most restaurant meals are partial expenses, and on, but it's done legally with pre-tax dollars. And I think currently I'm a sole proprietor, even though I own my own business. But I was reading that it's not really worth setting up an LLC or being structured as being taxed as an S corp until I get to at least $70,000 in income. So once I reach that point, I'm going to go through the whole rigmarole of having going through the state and setting up an LLC. But until then, it's not really worth it. Protection from lawsuits. We live in a litigious society. Everyone wants a piece of your action. The rich hide much of their wealth using vehicles such as corporations and trusts to protect their assets from creditors. When someone sues a wealthy individual, they often are met with layers of legal protection and often find that the wealthy person actually owns nothing. They control everything but own nothing. The poor middle class try to own everything and lose it to the government or to fellow citizens who like to sue the rich. They learned it from Robin Hood's story, to take from the rich and give to the poor. It's not the purpose of this book to go into specifics of owning a corporation, but I will say that if you own any kind of legitimate assets, I would consider finding out more about the benefits and protections offered by corporations as soon as possible. There are many books written on the subject with the detail of the benefit and even walk through you the steps necessary to set up a corporation. Garrett Sutton's books on corporations provide wonderful insight on the power of personal corporations. Financial IQs, actually the synergy of many skills and talents. I would say it is this combination of the 4 technical skills listed above that make up basic financial intelligence. If you aspire great wealth, it is the combination of these skills that will greatly amplify your intelligence, your financial intelligence. In summary, business owners with corporations earn, spend, pay taxes. Employees who work for corporations earn, pay taxes, spend. As part of your overall financial strategy, I recommend that you learn about the protection that legal entities can provide for business owners and assets. So, that was it. Earn, spend, pay taxes. That's why starting your own business is so great, and that's why even starting a hobby business, assuming its goal is to make money and one day become profitable, is a great way to pay tax, buy stuff and then use it as a tax deduction. But you can't really deduct anything until you have an income, so it's kind of but I'm not getting into it right now because we're reading a book. But anyway, I would start looking into it if you are interested about paying less taxes. Okay, here's the chapter 4. What is it? Study session. So go through that real quick. I'm going to skip the summary and we'll go right into what Robert is saying. So remember, we're just going to go through some quotes and try to understand what Robert is saying. First one. My rich dad just played the game smart. He did it through corporations, the biggest secret of the rich. Well, because people that work for a corporation have no need to learn how to set up a corporation. But once I go through setting up for myself, I can talk more about why I did it and what it helps me do. Currently, I'm just sole proprietor, which is no protection and no, I can still write off deductions and stuff, but anyway. Yeah, everything you do is you play it smart. It's set up that way, right? So why not play the game according to the game's rules? The reality is the rich are not taxed. It's the middle class who pays for the poor, especially the educated upper middle income class. It's because they make a high income, and if you look at our tax brackets, they're quite ridiculous. And so chances are if you're going to be paying as much taxes as you would if you lived in Europe, except you don't get free healthcare, you don't get, your kids don't get free, essentially free college. And then it's like, yeah, we're paying for the military essentially, so Europe really doesn't have a military budget compared to ours. But in exchange, it's not about you, it's about the U.S. having hegemony over the most of the world. So your taxes are paying for the U.S.'s hegemony over the world. Hegemony. Why am I saying that? I think I had a brain fart. Okay. That's why you pay taxes. Not for fixing potholes in the road. Well, that's different taxes, but anyway. Every time people try to punish the rich don't simply comply. They react. They have money, power, and intent to change things. They don't sit there, okay, that's why lobbyists exist and everything when it comes to why government's so corrupt. Okay, that's one part. And whenever they say tax the rich, it's like, yeah, they can just take their money to somewhere else. And where they don't pay taxes. Like, that's the reason the whole Cayman Islands thing exists. And there's going to be places that are going to say, well, we would like some money. You bring your money over to here, and we'll give you preferential treatment. And then people are going to be like, okay, that sounds great. And then all of a sudden you're like, we can raise so much taxes. And then the next year it's like, well, all that money we thought we can tax is actually gone. So now we're kind of stuck back at square one, and it actually hurt everybody else. And this is why they're trying to tax unrealized capital gains on the wealthiest. See, this is the exact same shit. They're going to start by taxing the wealthiest, and it's going to come down to the middle class, and they're going to start taxing everybody's unrealized taxable gains. And it's goddamn... Not I hate the government, it's just like the people in charge of the government are so... They're beyond stupid. Like literally, I would rather vote a dog into office like they have on Vashon. I think the mayor of Vashon is a dog. It's like, I'm going to start this amazing company and it's going to get me rich, and we're going to be able to colonize Mars and like get humanity off of Earth and all this great shit that like the future of humanity should be. It's like, we really want to be stuck on a planet forever until we finally like kill ourselves because of war or like chemicals or whatnot. It's like, that's what we aspire to. So we're just going to penalize everybody. Shit. Employees earn and get taxed, and they try to live on what is left. A corporation earns, spends everything it can, and it gets taxed on everything that's left. It's one of the biggest legal loopholes that the rich can use. Well, they're essentially running their business like the government, except they try to be lean and mean, but also spend all their money, so they can essentially not get taxed versus getting more from the government. Yeah, it's like when you buy a new car, let's say, because of the easy example. So you earn money, you get taxed on it, and then you buy a car, and then you get taxed on it again. So you paid around 10% on buying a new car. I think it's different if you don't live in the sales tax state, like in Washington. So you pay taxes twice on the money that you earned, versus a corporation, you have pre-tax dollars, meaning, let's say you buy a car, let's say $10,000. You buy a car for $10,000, and then you still have to pay taxes, of course, on the sales tax. So you're spending $13,000 on a car. But however, if you take a paycheck, so let's say you're trying to buy a $10,000 car, so you have to make at least $1,250. That gets taxed down to $10,000. And then you buy that car again, so you need an extra $3,000. So you actually need over $15,000 to buy a $10,000 car. Versus a corporation, you need $13,000. So exact same product. Thanks to the government, it becomes very inefficient for you as an employee to actually buy stuff versus having a corporation buy the stuff for you, especially if it's also a write-off. So. Yeah, leasing your car, and you can write off the interest and everything, and the mileage and everything. It's great, and the gas and everything. But you have to use it as a business expense. You can't just use it for personal pleasure. And then, that's how the IRS tries to get after the people who try to exploit the system. But as a real estate agent, like, you're going to use your car a lot, right? So it's pretty straightforward how much of a savings that could be for a real estate agent. Okay, that's it. We're at 35 minutes. Okay, that was lesson number 4. Okay, with that, I got to get to work finally and see what the rest of the day has in store. Okay.